Let me move into digging for sounds. So the natural question is, okay, thanks, D. If you got, those are your guiding principles, can you give us the how, more of the practical tips? And I did share this a little bit with respects to sample packs, but I'm going to give you a little quick story about Gadget from OVO. He's one of Drake's chief engineers. If you know 40 from Drake's camp, Gadget is the guy that mentored 40. So when I would characterize my production style as, you know, although it's electronic music, its approach is very rooted in a hip hop mentality. You know, I like to dig for records. I like to know everything about who's on the record, who played whatever, why they played the way they did, and then go down other rabbit holes from there. But I'll come back to that in a bit. Gadget, we used to record out of his studio in Toronto. And one of the things he said to me as a young, 17-year-old producer, he was like, listen, man, in anything that you do, always search for quality sounds and make sure you limit the signal paths. Meaning, if you want to sample that snare, make sure it's just a mic. Make sure it's just a mic and you're capturing it. As opposed to it's someone hitting the snare, it's going through compressors and a whole bunch of other shit, and you end up with what you end up with. And he said that because you want to be able to have a lot of flexibility with whatever you sample or bring in, because with that flexibility, you can mold things and make them your own. So quality sounds always. And here's the other reason why I say that. Again, we're in a world of immediate gratification. So I've run into this conversation numerous times, and people say, well, why do I need to dig for records necessarily? We got YouTube, got Spotify, we got Apple Music. I just turn it on, run it through, what is it, Sunflower, that takes the, whatever runs through your sound card. I see people smiling because you've done this, right? But the problem with that is it goes back to quality. When you sample a record, you get more dynamics, right? And that means there's more information and much more to do with it. So if we go back with Gadget's advice, that would be the more optimal scenario than Spotify, because Spotify and YouTube, they compress the sound. It's already like, it's like someone put a transient shaper on it and just cut it off and said, all right, here you go. Good luck in trying to make that sound great. I'm not saying don't look to those places to sample stuff. I'm just saying up the quality of your sounds, because the rest of the world is doing exactly that. And that's an important distinction. And mastering engineers will love you for it because your records will just sound better. So quality of sounds, I can't emphasize that point enough. So let's talk about the sources, right? So remember, I have sort of like a hip hop approach. I don't limit myself to anything where I can hear or be inspired into taking that sound and making it my own. Like, I could tell you, I'll be very frank about this. Philippine Sunrise was a song I did on Detroit. Sorry, they're now called Damn Swindle. It's 2020. They're called Damn Swindle now, and I love these guys. So Philippine Sunrise, that sample came from Robert Glasper, because I'm inspired by whatever Robert Glasper does. And Robert Glasper is inspired by Ahmad Jamal, Herbie Hancock, Miles Davis, all these guys whose vinyl records I've collected. So I stay close to whatever Mr. Glasper's doing. So one late evening, I was on IG, and he was playing some improvisation stuff in the Philippines. I was like, okay, let's go sample that. Put it in. It was done. But if you hear the original, you would be like, I hear it, but I'm not sure where Demuir sampled it. And that's what you want, because I took it and made it my own. You know, I processed it a little bit because it's IG, it's compressed and stuff. But I didn't limit myself to say, well, I only use these types of sample packs, or I don't, sample any rock records or whatever. You do have producers that do that. Well, the whole thing is music. All music is a culmination of inspiration from a multiple array of sources. It really is. Like, like Frank Zappa being inspired by George Duke, who is a jazz guy. But when you think about Frank Zappa, he's like rock, right? So don't limit yourself to any particular genre or any particular sound source to be able to be in the mode of inspiration for your own productions. If it sounds good to you, man, just sample it. And don't overthink it. Like, I get a lot of these questions like, oh, what about sample? Man, just sample it. Like, you won't, like, it's 2020, man. You won't sell enough records to have a huge lawsuit at your front door. And even if that happens, it's like, I'll use the Africa Bombada example. When Kraftwerk found out he sampled the Trans Europe Express, they just went straight to his label and said, hey, include us in the revenue. But the revenues are so small in music today. I consider the ability of putting out music and releases and making sure they're great consistently, they're really just invitations to the party. You're not going to make a ton of money off of the actual music. So don't limit your creativity, because it's not the same age. It's 2020. So with that being said, I'm going to give you a huge gem here. Discogs is your best friend. I'm going to say that again. Discogs is your best friend. And the reason why I'm saying Discogs is your greatest friend is you can literally go to Discogs, and I have sampled this Herbie Mann record, by the way. You can literally go in, put in the catalog of this record, and it'll tell you everything about the record. And I actually did that on Discogs. I was like, who's playing these Fender Rhodes? Like, who arranged the shit? And it gives you the whole level of information that you wouldn't have otherwise been open to, above and beyond just seeing a digital cover today on your computer screen. Like, I've literally gone down rabbit holes like, oh, Joe Sample played Fender Rhodes on this record. Okay. And then you click that, and then it shows you his whole discography, what studios he recorded out of, who else recorded out of those studios. And I did say studios because back in the day, certain studios, they had a certain energy and feel to it. Like Electric Lady is a perfect example with Jimi Hendrix. He built that studio for himself, but everything up to, I think it's still open, like D'Angelo recorded Voodoo out of that studio. And it has certain characteristics in there that hardcore artists go towards. And it's perfect for me as a sampling agent, because I'm like, man, okay, let's see what other good stuff came out of there. If I like these three guys and this is the place where they recorded out of, I wonder what other artists got inspired by the same place. And that might open up my perspective. This has happened to me multiple times, so check out the artists, bands, songwriters, who arranged the records, where they were recorded out of, who produced the records, and you will just have a whole set of opportunities and wonder available to you. Like, you know, I started out, my dad is classically trained, but he's from Trinidad, so he loved calypso. And then he discovered jazz when he came to Canada. And I could tell you, it just went bananas after that, you know? So he had calypso records, jazz, then it went into fusion like Chick Corea and Return to Forever, um, then pop, then, you know, soul, country, and then you're like listening to these country records, and then you see, oh shit, Al Green wrote a country song. Al Green, the soul singer, wrote a country song, and he has a whole bunch of country songs. And you go into to that rabbit hole, and you find out, oh man, that guy who played that funky bass on that particular record is some white dude from, you know, the New Orleans, and he got that way because he heard, you know, the Meters, which is the Neville brothers, Aaron Neville, and a whole bunch. You know, there's cousins there, and again, I'm just trying to show you, like, there's boundless opportunity, you know, and you just don't have to be limited to it, you know. And then what else my dad had? Italo disco, regular disco records, reggae, dub. And here's the funny thing. I'll never forget this. I think if you're familiar with A Tribe Called Quest, I was playing the Low End Theory album, and I remember my dad being like, he's like, wait a second, they stole that music. They took it off of this record, and he pulled the record out. I'm like, oh man, Jack DeJohnette is bugging out, because my dad, his ears that trained. He was like, those are the first three notes of the record. And all they did was, and he's showing me, he's like, I'm like, dude, you don't make hip hop records. But look, I'll never forget, that was a profound moment for me, right? Because having such broad perspective, it even enhances the way you hear things, you know, as a result, you know. I mean, Lusting You is another good example. That song I did with Louis Robinson on Kerry Chandler's Chaos label. I was at a place called Bar Chef in Toronto, and I heard the original record being played, Shazammed it. I'm like, okay. Went home, made the song the next day. It was done. And Kerry, he was like, oh man, you sampled that from this. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, okay, we got to get this guy to sing over it, so we'll be okay from a sample perspective. But I'm telling you, it's nonstop, and it'll probably drive your spouses crazy after a while, because you'll be hearing things in a very different way. Like, and I remember being on this gospel trip. I was like, yo, man, I got to get me some 70s gospel from Toronto. I got to get all those records. So I'd go out to Scarborough. They'd be in the dollar bin. And this is my next point is, you know, I already spoke about the danger of the internet compressing sounds. And I'm not saying stay away from it. You know, you can still get creative. You can do some creative EQing to make it as dynamic as possible in your mixes, but it's always best to go as close as possible to the sound source. So ideally vinyl. And if you can't get to it and you go to the internet, just make sure you EQ it properly with as much dynamics as possible. But you know, I've gone through dollar bins, you know, flea markets to find certain records. Like, that's some crazy stuff. Like, I went out to Curtis, Ontario, which is like way east of Toronto. And I gone to the flea market, come back home with a stack of records to be inspired. Some of those records I still have, you know. So don't limit yourself, you know. And if certain artists that inspire you and the artists that inspired them take you down certain rat holes, dive right in it, man. Don't say, well, I'm making this music, how am I going to translate it? Well, that's what part of finding your sound is. There's not a lot of people who are going to take that approach. Everybody's just dragging and dropping right now. And here's the other thing about the sampling game. 2 more points. So I'll tell you the story about I don't know if there's any Pete Rock fans here, but Pete Rock, I got two stories about it. So there's a record store here in Toronto called Cosmos Records. It's owned by my friend Aki, and he has two locations. One just east of was it Bathurst, and one west of Bathurst. Anyway, he told me the story. Pete Rock called him on the phone 6 a.m, saying, "I'm in front of the store, man. Open the store, bro. I'm here to get inspired." And this guy has 65,000 pieces of vinyl. It's like, Pete, what else do you need? But I'm telling you this because it's an obsession, and that obsession will cause you to just focus in on your own shit and not be concerned with, well, what did Jamie Jones do on his other record? Like, I love Jamie Jones. You know, I've signed to Hot Creations and done stuff for them, but I'm more concerned about my own artistry and what I want to put out. You know what I mean? So if it takes you to certain places, you go there. And the other thing, Pete, this is the second piece about Pete Rock when it comes to sampling. He's like, listen to the whole record. You know, we're in a time, and I'll admit it, like, you know, you're sitting here moving the needle around or clicking the mouse around. I don't know which one has me more impatient, if it's when I'm listening to something I want to sample off of the computer or the record. I'm not sure yet. But he's like, listen to the whole thing. And the reason why you should listen to the whole thing is you may hear something that just passes by in a moment, that is really dope. And as a result of listening to the whole thing, you can pull some really cool stuff out. Um, so those are my two pieces on Pete Rock. Like, listening to the whole record and being obsessed is like, those things don't go away. I have that, man. It's bananas. Um, and the last point I'm going to leave you with when it comes to the sampling game is be original. And I've done videos on this. I've had very heated conversations with people online about this. Um, and what I mean by be original is if you hear somebody has sampled that Chic sample a million times, don't go do the same fucking thing again. Like, just let it be its thing. It's an easy grab, and some people in dance music, like Jim, you'll probably remember the song, the Michael Jackson loop, Off the Wall loop. Tonight, you're gonna leave your 9 to 5 up on the shelf and just enjoy yourself tonight. That I heard that record in the 90s. Then these Block and Crown motherfuckers, and I'm not trying to shit on people. I'm giving you Ben's losing his mind. I'm giving you a real example of lackluster artistry. That's what it is, you know, because we're talking about how do I create records that excite people, that want them to hear it, you know, and you gotta go for the things that people haven't necessarily done, or, you know, if it's already been done, make sure you do it a different way, you know. I had one of my monthly one-on-ones with one of my students out in, I think they're in Liverpool. I was so happy for them because they sampled a disco loop that I've heard before, and they just chopped it up in such a different way. It was a whole other vibe and a possibility that excited me, and I was excited for them because people are going to hear the record and say, man, this is fresh, you know. And that's the impression you want to leave. But you'll never be able to do that by doing what has been done over and over and over again. I don't care. You can put a singer on it. It's, in my opinion, it's still the same record that somebody's done before, and it's cheesy at the end of the day, to quote Ben. I saw that. So that is the piece on digging. Jim, I'm just looking at the time. You know what? I'll go through tools of the trade, but I think we'll have a lot of good time for Q&A. So those are my thoughts on sampling, and this is the core of everything you do in terms of finding uniqueness in your sound is to explore deeply, allow for serendipity, and if you're going to use a sample pack, just do it different, man. You know, no one has to know you tried that Chic sample again and your flip didn't work.